Welcome, everybody, and great to be on Tune In Tuesday. Um, this is a real fun week. We got a lot of stuff going on with astronomy. Not only do we have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction coming up a week from tonight, but we've also had a total solar eclipse yesterday. It wasn't visible for us, but it was down in South America. And there's also some meteor shower activity going on, which is pretty exciting. We're supposed to be pretty busy up in the skies with all that leading up to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So if you've been paying attention to the night skies lately, and you've heard, obviously that Jupiter and Saturn are visible and they've been prominent in the heavens for the last couple of months. This is a notable pair of gas giants in our solar system. They have a long and distinguished history, both in secular and sacred sky lore. And due to their next normal union, coming up, as I said, this month on the 21st and 22nd in Aquarius on the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year, this marks the first Jupiter-Saturn conjunction since May of 2000 and the closest union since 1623, with only a tenth of a degree separation. And in the previous union, 20 years prior to 1623, Johannes Kepler in 1603 saw a regular union of Jupiter-Saturn, which was, and these are also called a great conjunction. It's a series that happens, the regular ones happen every 20 years. And because it's called great because this is the two largest planets in our solar system. So in 7 BC, there was also a Kepler calculated that a similar union of Jupiter and Saturn took place in 7 BC. This was a triple union, and Jupiter and Saturn were not more than a degree apart. So as we've seen in the national media, the current Jupiter-Saturn union is called the return of the Christmas star, marking the birth of Christ. But this is a little injecting a little bit of confusion regarding the Star of Bethlehem. And this is the kind of stuff that we're going to kind of distinguish and avoid as a result of tonight's teaching. And so we really want to understand what happened with the Star of Bethlehem. The Jupiter-Saturn triple unions in 7 and 6 BC marked the birth, going back to Abraham and Moses, which, by the way, I am going to be posting this on the blog, and there'll be links to both of those studies in here, because there were Jupiter-Saturn triple conjunctions that marked the births of both of those, which leading up to the birth of Christ. And as we view the events leading up to and beyond the Bethlehem star, we find a vital role played by Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions marking the birth of Christ, keeping in mind that the promised seed had to be fully human as a son of Adam. He was also a son of Abraham and a son of David. Son of David is in Genesis 49, 9 through 10. Son of Abraham in Genesis chapters 13 and 15. And also son of Adam was in Genesis 3:15, the first prophecy of the promised seed. So those are kind of the introductory remarks. During this holiday season, most of us who realize that Christ was not born on September 25th wonder if there's any biblical significance to the remembrance of the birth of Christ at this time of year. Since much of the information on my blog and website shows proof of the birth of Christ on September 11th, 3 BC, we've documented that the Magi did not arrive in Jerusalem until December of 2 BC, as the Gospel of Matthew records. So in Matthew 2, 1 and 2, it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, the Magi came from the east to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one that's been born King of the Jews? And he saw his star when it arose, and we've come to worship him. So the question is, what star did the Magi see that led them to Jerusalem? And it was the king planet Jupiter. And so in 76 BC, as we mentioned, it was involved in this triple conjunction with Jupiter and Saturn in Pisces. And that served as a celestial prelude to the triple conjunction of Jupiter Regulus in 3 and 2 BC, marking the birth of Christ. The Magi were astronomer kings from the eastern land of Persia, who, upon observing Jupiter's movements, got started on their intrepid journey across about 900 miles of hostile desert territory towards Jerusalem. They did not arrive, as we said, until the following year, when King Herod organized a meeting with his chief priests and teachers of the law. In Matthew 2, 3 through 8, it says, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he went to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. So as the record denotes, King Herod really was not interested in worshiping Jesus since he had all the children 2 years and under killed in Bethlehem. And he would have not done this unless the exact time the star appeared to the Magi was close to the start of this 2-year time frame. The gospel also tells us that the Magi found the young child, a paidon in Greek, in a house, not a newborn, a brephos, in a manger. So when they arrived in Matthew 2:11, and this is why God warned the Magi of Herod's treachery in a dream, to avoid Herod and take a different route to get back to their homeland. In Matthew 2:9 and 10, it says, after they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen rose and went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. So the king planet Jupiter guided the hearts of the Magi to be among the first Gentiles to recognize the only begotten Son of God, as it halted in retrograde motion over Jupiter and Bethlehem a few miles to the south. The banner leading this blog, which I'm obviously going to post here, shows Jupiter standing still in Virgo over Bethlehem during the winter solstice, when the sun, the light of the world, is also standing still. And the word solstice means sun stands still. And it is not a coincidence that Jupiter, the king planet, was standing still over Bethlehem, marking Jesus' birthplace, while the sun, as the light of the world, stood still also. What a joy and a thrilling time this was for the Magi to follow this with precision. The wandering stars or planets, as the Creator had set them in their orbits and celestial stations, to find the promised seed. Jupiter, as his star, led the Magi to the dawning of the Messiah. And it opened the way through the principles of biblical astronomy to the Redeemer, the Lord Jesus Christ. So the premise of a celestial prelude is based on the simple fact that God would not ordain the long-awaited birth of his only begotten Son, the eternal purpose of the ages, without a little advance notice. The concept of this prelude is based on the Jupiter-Saturn triple conjunctions of 7-6 BC that was not as close a union as these planets are going to have this week. The triple union of 7-6 BC provided a basis for the Magi to recognize the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Regulus in 3 BC as the specific signs marking the birth of Christ. This prelude has two parts. The first is general, the second is specific. The confusion of these two separate parts of the celestial prelude has caused much uncertainty surrounding the birth of Christ. They kind of lump them together. So we're going to keep them separate, and we'll see a lot of clarity as a result of that. A good place to start thinking about the first part of this prelude is, where did the popular idea of a single bright star, obvious to all, marking Christ's birth originate? The answer is found in what I refer to as the general sign of the celestial prelude that alerted the Magi to the broader period when the promised seed would appear. The first decan or subordinate sign of Virgo was originally called Coma, and that's also seen in the blog header as an L-shaped constellation. It's next to Virgo, and it means the desired or longed for, referred to in the book of Haggai 2:7. In verse 7, it says, I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. And the house is talking about the temple. So, Bullinger has a picture, and I'll have that in the blog also, about the Coma sign was one of the 3 decans that are part of Virgo, and it was pictured as a woman, a seated woman with a young child in her lap that she's instructing. And Numbers 24:17 comes into play here, because this is one of Balaam's prophecies where it says, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall arise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab and destroy all the children of Shet. There's a celestial double meaning in Numbers 24:17 here in the phrase star out of Jacob, with connotations for both the general and specific signs of the celestial prelude. There was a new star, or a supernova, that actually exploded onto the scene in the head of the child in Coma, and it was visible for over 275 years. This is what I call the general sign. And the star of Jacob that prepared the Magi to watch for the specific aspects of the second part of the celestial prelude, which included the Jupiter-Saturn triple unions of 7 and 6 BC in Pisces. We find this second aspect of Balaam's prophecy relating to the scepter in the verse here, which is symbolic of the reign of a king. And that's where the planet Jupiter comes into play, because it's the king planet. And as we progress through our study, it becomes evident that Jupiter was the planet that the Magi called his star in Matthew 2:2. Magi noted the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 7 BC, and that gave them a blueprint for the actual signs marking Christ's birth in 3 BC. An early sign in August 12th of 3 BC motivated them. It was a Jupiter-Venus conjunction, motivated the Magi to start their caravan to Jerusalem. And both of these aspects of the general and specific celestial signs marking the birth of Christ are found in the study in the stars over Bethlehem, and that again is going to be linked on the blog, which I'll be posting later this week. Along with the chart below, it provides some wonderful details of what the Magi observed in the skies overhead at the Messiah's birth in both Virgo and Coma, because they would have seen both of them simultaneously. The coma supernova in the head of the child would have been visible at the same time that Jupiter would have been standing still and marking Bethlehem as the place of the birth of Christ. The first decan of Virgo, called Coma, is seen in the Dendera zodiac, as I mentioned before. And the Egyptian name for this decan of Virgo was called Shesnu, which means the desired son, just like we just read from Haggai 2:7. So there it kind of gives you a clue that the ancient Egyptians were tied into the true meaning of the Gospel of the Stars with a lot of their names for these stars. And that's very revealing when we get into, some of the ancient Egyptian astronomy. I actually have a website article on that on try-god.com. So the prophet Daniel actually taught the Magi and other astronomers of King Nebuchadnezzar's court, which is referred to in Daniel 5:11, about these planetary unions from a contemporary example of a Jupiter-Saturn triple union in 523 to 522 BC in Virgo. Less than 400 years later, in 128 BC, a new star, the Coma supernova, exploded in the head of the woman in coma. And this is a key when we remember that much of the history was based on the teachings of the prophet Daniel, who was made the master of the Magi and the Chaldeans and stargazers of the king's court in Babylon. He continued to preside over this august group during the reign of Darius the first, which is in Daniel 6:1-3. When the Persians took control of the Babylonian Empire, Daniel's influence on this genuine sect of the Magi, which was not the magicians who followed the occult and astrology paths that represented a critical impact on the astronomical doctrine of these Gentile scientists. And so they had a good tradition that they had followed over about a 500-600 year period, and even the predecessors of the Magi were aware of the truths of the celestial gospel concerning the coming Redeemer, since it was their unrivaled expertise in astronomy that led them to Jerusalem following Jupiter in the first place. So let's see here. Now this chart is kind of what I referred to a little bit earlier. What I've done is I've kind of mapped out this whole period of visibility where the Coma supernova, and it was visible to the naked eye for 275 years once it exploded onto the scene. So it started in 128 BC, but I'm going to take and kind of document this time period, pointing out certain specific key celestial signs. There was, for example, Jupiter-Saturn regular conjunction in 185 BC in Pisces. And then 20 years later, there was another one in 165 that was also in Pisces. And so that actually kind of encompasses a blood moon tetrad, which I did a blog for that'll be linked in this chart, in 168 to 166 BC. This was when Antiochus IV, which was called Epiphanes, which means God manifest. Talk about an ego trip. And he was one where he went into Jerusalem because there was a revolt that was going on, and he was suppressing it. And he destroyed the temple at that point, the Jerusalem temple, and there was a blood moon tetrad that marked that. And another key biblical sign in 164 BC was Halley's Comet. That was actually an early Babylonian sighting that happened during that same period. Then in 128 BC, the Coma supernova appears in Virgo in the head of the child in coma. And leading closer to the Jupiter-Saturn triple conjunction in 7 BC, in 12 BC, 5 years previous to that, there was another appearance of Halley's Comet. And then you have the triple conjunction of 7 BC. And then in 5 BC, you have another series of blood moons, both in Virgo and Pisces. And then in 3 BC, you have the Jupiter Regulus triple conjunctions that the Magi recognized. And then we're going to take it beyond that to 70 AD. In 66 AD, there was another Halley's Comet sign. In 70 AD, we had the destruction of the temple by Titus and the Romans, and there was a blood moon. There was some blood moons and some other signs, some key signs that relate. And the other thing that we want to point out too is there was a Revelation 12 sign. That was the sign that actually marked the birth of Christ 3 days before the first Jupiter Regulus conjunction in 3 BC. And there was another Revelation 12 sign in 70 AD, and that marked the destruction of the temple by Titus, along with the blood moons. And then in 147 AD, the Coma supernova went invisible again. So it was during that whole period, and this is what we're going to kind of look at, documenting the celestial signs during this period, because it's such a key period in history. It's the center point of messianic expectation. So first, we're going to talk about Halley's Comet a little bit. Just some basic history on Halley's. It's a short period comet that's visible from Earth every 75 to 76 years. Halley is the only known short period comet that is regularly visible to the naked eye from Earth. And Halley's Comet inspired both fascination and horror to its early observers. Comets are often considered a bad omen, and it was linked to everything from the death of kings to natural disasters. A well-known Chinese reference to Halley's Comet is found in the Han Dynasty's records of the Grand Historian, which observes a broom star, which is what they used to call comets, that appeared in the sky in 240 BC. Other early sightings came from the Babylonians, who recorded the comet in 164 BC, as I mentioned. There was also another appearance in 87 BC. And the 164 BC sighting was recorded on a cuneiform clay tablet between the 22nd and 28th of September in 164 BC in Babylon. And this was about 20 months after the abomination desolation that was carried out by Antiochus IV in his destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And he actually took the Seleucid throne of Syria in 175 BC, and then in 167 he sent troops to suppress the Jerusalem revolt, also halting the daily temple sacrifices in Daniel 8:11 and polluting it in 167 to 164 BC. I did mention the 12 BC sighting of Halley from Rome, which took place 5 years before the triple union of Jupiter-Saturn in 7 BC. And so Halley's is really a key point. Some people have even kind of erroneously taken Halley's Comet as an actual sign of birth of Christ, but it was far too early for that. It is amazing, however, that Josephus, a non-believing Jewish historian, would record Halley's and other signs from God leading up to the ultimate destruction of Jerusalem and the temple that ended the Jewish age. It's also significant that the day of the temple's destruction in 70 AD was the anniversary of the day and month that the previous Jewish temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av on the Jewish calendar. And Josephus also described the comet of 66 AD as a star resembling a sword, and it was considered a portent of the temple's destruction in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And Titus, the Roman conqueror, reportedly refused to accept the wreath of victory from his conquering of Jerusalem, saying that the victory did not come through his own efforts, but that he had merely served as an instrument of God's wrath. Isn't that something? So, and that's secular history talking, right? So over the last 2,200 years, the blood moon tetrads dating to the 168-166 BC marked the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, along with Peter's sermon opening the age of grace in Acts 2:20, and there's been a steady progression of Bible prophecy related to Israel being progressively fulfilled, which includes celestial prophecies of the Jerusalem temple destruction, also spoken by Jesus and marked by blood moons, fulfilled in 70 AD. We witnessed the dispersion of the Jews around the world as we've seen the Jews return to a reformed state of Israel in 1948 to 1950. That was also marked by a blood moon tetrad. In 1967 to 1968, we saw the Six-Day War with Egypt, when Jerusalem was first reclaimed under Israel's control, the first time since 70 AD. And that was also marked by another blood moon tetrad. So, the next logical step in the prophecies is to rebuild the third Jerusalem temple, which there has been rumblings of that in our day. And so I'm going to have a table up there that compares some total solar eclipse and penumbral lunar eclipses that happened in 70 AD, and they were compared to almost exactly the same that occurred in 2016, just 4 years ago. And what was really interesting about that is that one of those penumbral lunar eclipses took place on Sukkot, which was one of the Hebrew holy days. There was another one on Rosh Hashanah, another one on Passover, another one on Nisan 1. That both of these in 70 AD and in 2016, we had the same types of lunar signs occurring. And on 9/23/16, there was that penumbral lunar eclipse, and that was exactly 1 year to the day before the Revelation 12 sign of the woman, which, is what marked the birth of Christ, and that happened 9/23/17. What's interesting about this in 70 AD is that there was also a Revelation 12 sign right smack dab in the middle of these lunar signs. So this connects these two not only by the dates of the Hebrew holy days, feast and holy days, but also with the occurrence of the Revelation 12 sign in both instances. And to kind of put a topping on that, there was actually a Jupiter, the first time, we already mentioned the Jupiter-Regulus triple conjunction that happened in 3 and 2 BC, marking the birth of Christ. Well, the first Jupiter-Regulus conjunction after that one happened in October of 69 AD in Leo. So that connects the Jupiter-Regulus along with the Revelation 12 sign with these two sets of blood moons that mirror each other, which is really an eye-opener. I mean, it's kind of flabbergasting. So if these, dates look familiar to those who follow my blog, the first two total solar eclipses of 2016 formed a continuation of the solar and lunar signs on Hebrew feast and holy days after the blood moon tetrad of 2014 and 2015. And due to the lack of consensus on the appearance of the Aviv barley in Israel, the alignment of these solar eclipses with Hebrew feast and holy days went mostly unnoticed in 2016. But they are key as they represent a direct link to the August 21st, 2017 Pan-American total solar eclipse. You might recall that one. So that was a month before that Revelation 12 sign took place, within a couple of days. So there was a whole lot of stuff going on, as you can see recently, that ties into all this stuff. A key detail on the second blood moon of each lunar triple bracketing the 2014-2015 blood moon tetrad is that it was visible over Jerusalem, which was another direct link with the blood moon tetrad to the raising of the Jerusalem temple, raising it to the ground, where Jesus prophesied that there would be not one stone on top of another, to his disciples. And so that is, again, a real eye-opener. And Titus and his Roman legions burnt the temple in 70 and 71 AD, and in both cases, Jerusalem lay desolate for the next 50 years on the Jubilee calendar. So it's also noteworthy that the triple union of Jupiter Regulus, marking the birth of Christ, was linked to the temple destruction. It's not only the birth of Christ, it's the temple destruction that ties all this together. And that's one thing that I really see in putting this chart together in this timeline. So there'll be a lot. There'll be pictures of this and tie-ins to the chart links for you to be able to link to specific articles, expanded studies on each of these separate topics, which I don't have time to cover here. So in this overview of both the general and specific signs of the celestial prelude, the general sign was the Coma supernova, and it was visible, as I said, for over 275 years, while the signs from 7 to 5 BC focus on the triple union of Jupiter and Saturn during this period. These signs allowed the Magi to recognize the stellar details of the long-awaited prophecy of the coming of the promised seed. Also, during the same period referred to by Ptolemy, shekels from Judea struck during the period of the Second Revolt from 132 to 135 AD bear the sign of a bright star over the Jerusalem temple called Bar Kowkab. And Kowkab is the Hebrew word for star. So the leader of the Second Revolt was called Shimon Bar Kosiba. He was also known as Bar Kokhba, meaning son of the star, in reference to the messianic expectations of the time. So we've already read Numbers 24:17, and that word for star is Kowkab, the star out of Jacob. So that's the specific reference to the Jupiter and the Coma supernova. Now, like I said, it's a dual reference there. So there'll be a picture of some of these silver shekel coins that shows the temple pictured with the Ark of the Covenant between the central pillars. And this coin with the bright star over the temple is assumed to refer to Shimon as the son of the star and the leader of the revolt. But it could also have been a logical reference to the supernova that appeared in the head of the woman's son in Coma's lap. And the desired of the nations, because even a providential reference to Jesus as the true temple, because, and this is going to come up again a little bit later, Why would we even consider this as a possibility? Because the approximate 275-year period of visibility of the Coma supernova began 125 years before the birth of Christ, according to Hipparchus, with the appearance of the new star over the Jerusalem temple. And the impact of this new star would have been was seen in one of the leading sages at the time, known as Rabbi Akiva. And he proclaimed Bar Kokhba as the Messiah. This not only shows the messianic expectations of the period, but also the impact of the new star in the skies over Jerusalem, doubtlessly contributing to this general sign. So this was the kind of messianic expectation that permeated Jerusalem at the time. And it's really cool, I think, that because a lot of people have doubted even the appearance of the Coma supernova, but here we've got, what I believe is evidence of it engraved on a Jewish coin relating to the son of the star, which is, it matches the time of the, towards the end of the visibility period of the Coma supernova. So Bullinger uncovers below a popular belief regarding this general sign that was prevalent in and before the 1st century BC, a traditional prophecy well known in the East, carefully preserved and handed down, that a new star would appear in this sign Coma when he to whom it was foretold would be born. This tradition was at least partially based on Balaam's declaration in Numbers 24, meaning that Balaam's prophecy, again, for our purposes, holds a twofold purpose. So, there's a lot of background here with the Magi and the Chaldeans and Darius and Zoroaster that we had kind of mentioned, going back into the history of the Magi a little bit. The background on the Magi sheds light on a secular history of the blood moon cycle going back as far as ancient Sumeria, because the Sumerian name for the great lunar eclipse cycle was also called a Saros. The word traces back to a basic Babylonian unit of measure called a sar, S-A-R, and it's revealed ancient elements of the sacred celestial rule of measure. This lunation consisted of 18 years, 11 days, 10.96 days, and it was utilized by Chaldean priests to predict eclipses. And the Chaldeans were among the first to do that. So, the Chaldeans had a period of 3,600 years, which is 60 times 60, that they called a Saros. Again, we see the sexagesimal number pattern behind the heavenly order, because the whole numbering system based on 60 came from Sumerian and Babylonian Chaldean roots. And it was thick in their astronomy. So that number system is part of its function as a cornerstone of ancient cosmology, adding context to the celestial prelude, marking the birth of Christ. And it also has a key in what's called the precession of the equinoxes, which we'll get into a little bit later. So both of these gas giant planets frame the ancient solar system as its two outermost naked eye planets, as they open a window on the precession of the equinoxes. And it also shows a unity between the inner and outer solar system planets, with Saturn's 29.5 year orbit and the 29.5 day lunar cycle on a year-day basis. Saturn embodies half this base 60 order of the solar system, formatted in the orbits of these two gas giants, the other half being Jupiter's near 12-year cycle, spending a year in each zodiacal sign, even as the sun spends a month in each of the 12 signs. The solar half of the order is seen in the division of 60 by 12, which is 12 times 5, and the lunar half in the division by 30, 30 times 2, both equaling 60. This aspect of the numerical order of the solar system exhibits its base 60 order and ultimately designed by the hand of the creator according to the phi ratio, which we have heard about before. It kind of pervades creation. So the Babylonian Sar was doubtlessly related to the Hebrew word of the same spelling. The Hebrew in Strong's number is 8267, and it means prince, captain, chief, ruler, leader, head. And the word has retained this meaning even in modern usage as the Tsar of all the Russias, Tsar with a T in front of it. And it's used in Daniel 10, 13, and 20, referring to the archangel Michael, who dispatched the fallen angel, the daimon, who opposed the messenger angel that God sent to answer Daniel's prayer. In Isaiah 9:6, one of the great prophecies of the promised seed, it's used of the Messiah as Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace, the one who brings peace to all creation. Ephesians 2:11 through 18. So Johannes Kepler was also intrigued by the idea that there might have been an affinity between the planetary unions and the appearance of the 1603 supernova. And it's important, however, that we notice that Kepler was not only the first I'm aware of to suggest a planetary conjunction scenario to explain the Star of Bethlehem, but he was also the first to connect a supernova with these unions and relate it to what the Magi had seen. Yeah, I'm kind of a fan of Johannes Kepler. He was really on the ball with a lot of stuff. Taking a closer look at the 7 BC Jupiter-Saturn triple union involves the attention to each conjunction starting with the May 27th union. The first conjunction of Jupiter-Saturn shows the authority of the scepter of God's kingdom resident in the first heaven and earth with Lucifer as the first archangel who was at the right hand of God. And he alone was set apart in his authority over the angels, Genesis 1:1, before man was created in the second heavens and earth, in Genesis 1:2. These truths of the first heaven and earth, where only the angels dwelt, are symbolized in the first Jupiter-Saturn union of 7 BC. In the heavenly signs that followed, outside the clearly marked 2-year period from September 15th, 7 BC to September 15th, 5 BC, the rest of these specific preliminary signs are found in the Figure 1 chart. Its purpose is to mark the first estate of Lucifer, the original bright and morning star, second only to God the Creator. And in the first heaven and earth, he was head over all the angels as the archangel of light. And so, as we realize Lucifer's history according to the accuracy of God's word written in the stars and in Scripture, this first sign refers to Lucifer in his original estate. And I refer to Job 38, 4-7 here, and I'm linking a previous blog which really goes into much more depth on that, which you will really be blessed to check out. So his original moniker was the Star of the Morning. In Isaiah 14, it says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" Lucifer's demise is also indicated in the astronomical mechanism known as the precession of the poles. With the star Thuban, which was the bright star in Alpha Draconis, at the North Pole, Draco the dragon holds the original pole star. But over a 5,000-year period called the precession of the poles, that pole star moved from Draco and now resides near Polaris, or Al-Rakuba of the little flock of Ursa Minor. And of course, the flock is where all the believers are protected against the enemy. And the pole star between the feet of the crowned king Cephas depicts Jesus Christ in at least two ways. First, as a prominent king and a new chief cornerstone who supplanted the first cornerstone, which was Lucifer. And since Cephas is the crowned king, even as Regulus is the king star between the feet of Leo, the lion king of Judah. So you can see how the new king is replacing the old one here forever. And Cephas also means the branch, and it's depicted as a king holding a branch at the North Pole. Some really good verses on this. Jeremiah 23:5 and 33:15. There obviously were four manifestations of the branch, which are all embodied in the four Gospels, where in Matthew, Jesus was the king. In Mark, he's the servant. In Luke, he's the son. In Luke, he's the, John, he's the son. And Luke, he is another one of those guys. There's four of them. So that'll be on the blog too. Can't think of it right now. And so again, Kepler made a detailed study of the moving geometry of the sky, and he represented the periods of the planets by geometric figures with values based on fundamental divisions of the circle into 4, 6, and 12 sections. The division into 12 is what gives us the 12 signs of the zodiac. And he made a model that related the 5 platonic solids to the planetary orbits, where the cube occupied the space between the orbits of Saturn and Jupiter, and the tetrahedron between Jupiter and Mars. Since then, many mind-boggling mathematical relationships have been discovered between planet cycles, like sizes, distances from each other, as well as their speed, their axis inclinations, and even their rates of spin. These findings point to the presence of an intelligent designer of the universe. They prove that rather than randomly evolving, the sun, together with the planets and their moons, form a unified living system of the greatest order and elegance. And I've got a blog link on that goes to a much more detailed study along those lines. Kepler reviewed the planetary order along the lines of the music of the spheres, unifying the basis for the outer and inner planets. One of the ways this is found in the geometric harmony of the solar system is in the orbits of the gas giants Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus. So the diagram below, which you'll see in there, kind of maps this, and it illustrates the structure of a musical octave with an 8-pointed star that halves or doubles the wavelengths or frequencies of the musical scale when an equilateral triangle contains the inscribed inner circle with half the diameter of the outer circle. So you'll see that, and that kind of shows you the geometric harmony that God put into the solar system when he created it. And this geometry of the diagram not only depicts the musical order of these outer solar system planets, but since Jupiter and Saturn's orbits are in the proportion of 6 to 11 to 99.99 degree accuracy, this is the octave or double of the 3 to 11 moon to earth ratio, which is accurate to 99.9% accuracy, revealing a geometric harmony between the outer and inner planets I was talking about. So there will be more on this, which is kind of involved. I'm not going to get too far into it, but there's a 6-pointed star, which is also known as like the Star of David, that is found inside of the ecliptic, which is the path that the sun travels, where the 12 signs of the zodiac appear. And there's a pattern of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions that follows this hexagram construct that I'm telling you the Star of David is. And what's interesting is right at the core of that six-pointed star, which is six equilateral triangles, where each one of the bases of those triangles fits on the side of a hexagon, a six-sided geometric figure. And lo and behold, if you look at the pole of Saturn, the planet has a six-sided hexagon shape constructed at its north pole, which is pretty amazing when you look at the idea that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are based on this hexagram diagram, and there's a hexagram polar shape at the north of Saturn's pole, which is really interesting to me. I mean, it's just only God could do something like that. So there's more depth on that as the study proceeds, but there's more to this. The geometric stuff, I don't want to get too deep into it, but there's the astrology kind of gets into that a little bit, and they kind of take it off the rails. But when we keep our minds focused on the biblical symbolism, then we can really get the truth out of this. So from a biblical astronomy perspective, instead of viewing the astrological, stuff that they get into, we view the cycles of Jupiter and Saturn appearing in various zodiac signs or constellations around the ecliptic. We're going to take note of each one of the symbolism of those signs when the planet appears there, and there'll be a message there. And it also combines with the planetary meanings with biblical numerics to ascertain the meaning of these movements in the context not only of precession of the equinoxes, but also biblical ages, with the sacred geometry applications like the phi and pi ratios and the Lucas numbers also, which all those are found in the Great Pyramid. And this takes into account categories of heavenly signs, Hebrew feasts and holy days, and Jubilee cycles, among other considerations. And I'll have links for each of those categories that I just mentioned for you to check out deeper. So what's interesting about Saturn also is the number symbolism. Like if you look at the number 6 that we talked about with the hexagon, 6 is the number of man from a biblical symbolic viewpoint. And, that six-pointed Star of David, based on the hexagram at its center, with 6 equilateral triangles fit around each side, it's fitting that a 6-sided cube would also fill that cornerstone center hexagram, which you'll see that in one of these diagrams. And Saturn has been viewed mythologically as Satan's planet. We find many references to the number 6 linked to Saturn. Of course, the number of the beast in Revelation 666 is pretty common knowledge. And there's a black cube that's associated with the worship of Satan. And that's why that cube, which is a 6-sided geometric figure, is kind of key there. There's just too many times to be coincidence with that the number 6 shows up in comparison with Saturn. Like Saturn is the 6th planet in the solar system. Saturn also forms the name Saturday, which is the 6th day of the week. Saturn's north pole, as I mentioned, is six-sided, and Saturn has six most well-defined rings. The seventh one is very faint. So there's a lot of symbology with Saturn that we go into here, but I had mentioned the Hebrew temple and how the numbers of Jupiter and Saturn kind of are seen within the temple and tabernacle. So the sacred symbolism of the tabernacle reflects a 7-day temporal order that man was to follow in fellowship with the Almighty, as formed in the lunar calendar, embodied in the internal and external temporal measures. According to Payne, he first suggested an endwise union of either set of tabernacle curtains from Josephus forward, and depicts the internal tabernacle measurements as 12 cubits wide by 29.5 cubits long. Those numbers sound familiar from earlier in the teaching. And that's the internal measurement of the tabernacle. The external measurements are 12 1/3 cubits wide by 30 cubits long. So this represents an alternating lunar calendar of 29.5 and 30 lunar days in a month, a long-standing order in a 360-day calendar years. And the 12 cubit measure shows the 12 months of the solar year, while the 29.5 cubits embodies the lunar synodic month of 29.53 days, or 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 2.37 seconds. So we see this also in the time between two full or new moons is 29, 43 over 81 days for internal dimensions of the tabernacle curtains. And the tabernacle's external dimensions of 12 1/3 cubits wide by 30 cubits long shows 12.368 synodic months per year, or 12 7/19 by the 30 days of the solar month. So it's really interesting that you have these planetary measures and dimensions fitting in with these tabernacle dimensions also. It shows kind of a mirroring of God's creation in the solar system versus the temple and tabernacle, which is really cool. So as we've noted, there is also a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction recognized in close relationship to the precession of the equinoxes. And there was a number of ancient cultures that looked at this: Sumeria, Babylon, Egypt, and even in Mesoamerica. They had cycles that all recognized this. According to the pattern of Jupiter-Saturn triple unions that occurred in Pisces only once every 800 years. And this shows how the planetary conjunction series subdivides the precession, which is a total of about 25,000 years, because every 30 cycles of Jupiter-Saturn triple conjunctions in Pisces total a period of 24,000 years, which is close to that total time of precession. And here's where it gets even more accurate. According to Peter Tompkins, the Mayans also calculated the orbit of the Earth around the sun as 365, 24, 20 days, and marked the close of the year by the erection of a stone they called a tun, T-U-N. They did likewise for the 20-year cycle, or Katun, a period that they considered governed by the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, which has a regular union every 20 years. Tompkins also continues saying that the Maya had a special sacred year of 260 days called a Zokin that the Aztecs also had their own name for. And this 260-day sacred calendar was divided into 13 months of 20 days, and the multiples of 13 and 20 became the heart of a chronological computation stunning at its simplicity and exactness. The greater cycle of 260 years was 13 consecutive Jupiter and Saturn conjunction cycles of 20 years. So they really had this thing mapped out over longer periods of time. This greater 260-year cycle, based on the cycle of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, was also a tool anciently utilized by the Mayans to break down the precession of the equinoxes. And Tompkins states that the Mayans had a cycle of 942,890 days, or 2,582 years, that turned out to be 130 Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions. Twice this cycle, 5,163 years, not only gave the equivalent of the 260-year Jupiter-Saturn unions, but 100 of those greater 260-year cycles was equal to 26,000 years, which is much closer to the length of the precession of the equinoxes, as figured by not only the Mayans and the Aztecs, but the Greeks and Sumerians and Egyptians. So they definitely had something on the ball with the ancient world. So we're about ready to wrap this up here. Perhaps the highest compliment that we can pay the Magi is that they were genuine Gentile believers who sought for and accurately anticipated the first coming of Jesus according to the true science of astronomy that they applied in their own traditions of Zoroastrianism. As Matthew 2:10 states, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. The exceeding greatness of their joy, however, was not founded upon the sighting of his star only, but upon both the general and specific signs of the celestial prelude and all that Jupiter represented regarding the first coming of Jesus Christ, the promised seed written in the stars. Thus, we can also see the reason for their joy, because as Ralston states, Zoroaster taught the Persians that in the latter times a virgin would bring forth the son, and that when he should be born, a star would appear and should shine, and he would be conspicuous in the midst of the figure of the virgin. It is then said that he commanded his disciples, the Magi, when they should see the star, that they should go forth where it directed them and offer gifts to him which should be born. And this prophecy was given about 400 to 500 years before the Magi set out to Jerusalem. So there is a non-biblical prophecy of the promised seed right there. And this confirms what we've already seen in Zoroastrian writings concerning the coming of the promised seed. The Magi would certainly have been joyfully awestruck when they realized the dual witness of the supernova in Coma, along with his star, the king planet Jupiter, at rest in Virgo's midsection, both on their way to Bethlehem, all fulfilling their part in the prophecy written in the stars. The Magi truly desired the realization of the hope of all mankind as ambassadors for all Gentiles. The Magi came paying homage to the King of Kings who would rule all nations, the desired one of the nations. And the Heavenly Father showed his love and care for these early Gentile believers as he delivered them from the enemy's deceptive wrath manifested in Herod by the phenomenon of divine revelation. And the Magi are thus appropriate emissaries for all believing Gentiles, as they were guided by God's hand to herald the revival of the accurate teaching of the celestial epistles as the Creator's undeniable witness of nature to all the world. And God has set myriad wondrous secrets in the stars for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, with hearts to discern the hidden depths of the mysteries viewed in spiritual retrospect that also informs the biblical prophecy of current events. And it's the faith of the Magi that distinguished them in history, not only as consummate scientists, but also as shining lights showing the way to the revelation of the promised seed for all people of the earth.